بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله وحده والصلاة والسلام على من لا نبي بعده أما بعد. So just as an introduction, we don't have too much time, but an introduction to the topic that we will be hearing about throughout the weekend, racial equality in Islam. And so what we, it's working, so what I wanted to go through in the 25 minutes that I have, we're going to go through some terms and definitions of terminology that we will probably hear throughout the weekend. So just to kind of clear up any confusions that we may have in regards to the terminology that will be used throughout the weekend in regards to race and racism and prejudice and discrimination. We'll go through all of these terminologies. And then inshallah, I'm going to walk through a practical example of the Sahaba, radiallahu anhum, the practical example of the community of the Prophet ﷺ, the different people of different backgrounds, different ethnicities in the time of the Prophet ﷺ. So we'll start off with terms and definitions. The first word we'll hear time and time again is the word race. What is race? Race has to do with our physical appearance. And so race refers to a person's physical characteristics such as bone structure and skin, hair, or eye color. And this is something that's changed throughout history. It used to be more focused on ancestry and family ties, but in today's day and age, with globalization and with the mixed races that we have throughout the world, primarily race has to do with our physical characteristics, so our skin color, things of this nature. So like I mentioned, historically the concept of race has changed across cultures and eras, eventually becoming less connected to ancestry and family ties, and more concerned with superficial physical characteristics. So a person that has a black skin, a person that has white skin, someone that has curly hair, someone that has straight hair. This is race. The second term we'll hear throughout this weekend is ethnicity. What's the difference between race and ethnicity? Race, remember, physical characteristics. Ethnicity has to do with one's culture. And so one's background. This has to do with nationality, regional culture, ancestry, language. All of that is ethnicity. So the difference between race and ethnicity, race is physical, ethnicity is more cultural. Your language, your culture, your nationality. So that's the difference between race and ethnicity. The second or the third term that I wanted to go over was prejudice. Prejudice has to do with our beliefs. So a person has maybe a prejudice against something, which means that they have a belief or a thoughts and feelings or attitudes about a certain group. So a person that has a prejudice against a certain group, they just have an idea or a feeling, a belief about a certain group of people. That's different from discrimination, because in discrimination, a person's actually taking action. They're taking their prejudice or their beliefs and now putting it into action and acting out against a certain person of a certain group because of that group. And obviously this has to do with, a lot in the Islamic terminology, has to do with kibr, feeling that one's own race and ethnicity is superior to any other race or any other ethnicity or race. So discrimination is the unjust treatment of different categories of people, especially on the grounds of race, age, or sex. So a person that just has the thought of my race is better than the other race, that's a prejudice that they have. But the minute they act upon it, that's discrimination. The minute they go out and treat someone unfairly, that's discrimination. And the last term is racism. And so racism is a combination of both prejudice and discrimination against a certain group. So it involves, it's a type of prejudice that involves a set beliefs about a specific racial group. So that's the difference between all of the terms that we will be hearing throughout the weekend. And so just to remember, race is physical, ethnicity is more cultural and family background. Prejudice is just the thought against a certain group, whereas discrimination is acting out against that specific group. And racism is kind of is taking prejudice as well as discrimination and putting it against a certain person or group of a different race based on the belief that one's own race is superior. And this is, again, going back to the spiritual sickness of pride, thinking that oneself is superior, one's race, one's ethnicity, one's language, one's country is superior than the other. We'll mention some ayat of Quran, and I don't want to go into too much detail because there's many talks throughout the weekend that will repeat these same ayat and repeat the same ahadith. So I'll mention one ayah and then I'll skip through the others and I'll mention a few ahadith as well. The first ayah is that of Surah Al-Hujurat. In Surah Al-Hujurat, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala puts together many commandments in regards to social life. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions in regards to the nations and the tribes that we have been created with. Allah says, Ya ayyuhan nas, O people, inna khalaqnakum min dhakarin wa untha. I have created you from a male and female. وَجَعَلْنَاكُمْ شُعُوبًا وَقَبَائِلَ لِتَعَارَفُوا. And I have made you tribes and nations. The reason for creating us with different tribes and nations, لِتَعَارَفُوا, so that you may get to know one another. It's not to boast over the other person. It's not to claim superiority over the next person, but it's so that we can recognize one another. Imagine if everyone was the same height, in the same ethnicity, and spoke the same language. It would all be across the globe, 6 billion people that looked exactly the same. And so the reason why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created us differently is so that we can recognize one another, differentiate between one another. Inna akramakum indallahi atqakum. Verily the most righteous of you are those that are more righteous with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The most noble amongst you is those who are most noble or most righteous with Allah. So we can't rank ourselves in regards to our ethnicity or our race, but we rank ourselves, only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can rank us, and that's according to our righteousness or consciousness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Some ahadith, the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam, and there's I believe a whole section in today's or in this weekend's program, there will be a whole session on the farewell khutbah. I'm just going to pull out one of the ahadith or one of the one saying from the farewell khutbah of the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam. The Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam said, Ya ayyuhan nas, ala inna rabbakum wahid. Verily your Lord is one. O people, your Lord is one. Wa inna abakum wahid. And your Father is one. Meaning all of us, regardless of our color, our language, our nationality, our ethnicity, our culture, we are all the children of one man, Adam alayhi salatu wasalam. So the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam is describing and defining us as one family. Regardless of the culture that we come from, this language that we speak from, we're all the children of Adam alayhi salatu wassalam. And then the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam said, Ala la fadla li Arabiyyin ala a'jamiyyin. There is no superiority of an Arab over a non-Arab or a non-Arab over an Arab. Neither a person that has white skin over a person that has black skin or a person that has black skin over a person that has white skin. Illa bit-taqwa. The only distinguishing feature is your taqwa, your consciousness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the only thing that can distinguish a person is our connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In another hadith, this is around the same meaning, general meaning. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's beloved Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam talks about tribalism. And this is something that in the Arabic language is termed asabiyya, which is close to nationalism as well. The fact that my race or my country is the best country, or my people are the best people. My people that speak my language are the best people. My tribe, my country. The Prophet ﷺ mentions in a hadith, لَيْسَ مِنَّا مَنْ دَعَا إِلَىٰ عَصَبِيَّةٍ. A person who calls towards tribalism or calls toward my people being the best and superior over everyone else, the Prophet ﷺ said, this person is not from amongst my ummah. وَلَيْسَ مِنَّا مَنْ قَاتَلَ عَلَىٰ عَصَبِيَّةٍ. A person who fights for the sake of tribalism also is not from amongst the Muslims. وَلَيْسَ مِنَّا مَنْ مَاتَ عَلَىٰ عَصَبِيَّةٍ. A person who dies with the sickness of calling to their race or their culture or their ethnicity being superior than any other race, this is also, the Prophet ﷺ mentioned, this person is not from amongst the ummah of the Prophet ﷺ. So just some ahadith and some verses of the Quran which illustrate racial equality in Islam. How we as human beings are all children of the same family. We're all children of Adam alayhi salatu wasalam. The only thing that can distinguish a person is our taqwa, our connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now if you look at the Arabian Peninsula, it's right in the middle of everywhere. Right? There, Africa is literally miles away. The Horn of Africa is, I believe, less than 10 miles or less than 20 miles away from the Arabian Peninsula. It's not too far from the east as well. Not too far. It's in the middle of everything. And so to think, sometimes we think that the companions, all of them were Arab, or all of them were, it was just the Prophet ﷺ and people like the Prophet ﷺ except for maybe Bilal radiallahu anhu. This is something that's a misconception, something that if you look into the books of history and look amongst the galaxy of the Sahaba, you will find many Sahaba from different backgrounds. And so what I wanted to do in the next few minutes was to go through some companions that come from different backgrounds, obviously from the time of the Prophet ﷺ, except for Bilal radiallahu anhu, because I believe we have a whole session on Bilal radiallahu anhu. But before I start, I wanted to ask the crowd, how many of us, or just some examples of some companions that we can name that come from different backgrounds from the time of the Prophet ﷺ? So feel free, if a name comes to mind, a companion that's not of the Arab race in the time of the Prophet ﷺ, go ahead and raise your hand, inshallah. Yes.
Salman al-Farsi radiallahu anhu.
Salman al-Farsi radiallahu anhu. Good. So a Persian companion, and we'll talk about him. That's one. Yes. Suhaib al-Rumi. So that's a interesting one. So Suhaib al-Rumi, and I'll just quickly mention it. He's named Suhaib the Roman. So people will think he's from Rome, from the Byzantine Empire. He was originally from Arabia, right? The Arabian Peninsula. He was sold as a slave to the Roman Empire, lived his life there, and then made his way back to Mecca in Medina. So he's originally Arab. And they also called him a Rumi because he had blonde hair. But he wasn't a Roman in his background. So that's a good one, good guess, but not from a different background. Anyone else? Bilal radiallahu anhu, that's the famous one. Good. None other? So we're going to go through, yes. Huh? Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu, that's still the Arabian Peninsula. So we'll go through, there's many companions, but it's just something that we don't know. I think, this is kind of a demonstration of us not knowing any companions that were from different backgrounds besides maybe Bilal radiallahu anhu or Salman al-Farsi radiallahu anhu. So something that's interesting, being an Arab and being black was not mutually exclusive in the time of the Prophet ﷺ. Historically speaking, there are many companions that were from right across the water that separates what is nowadays Saudi Arabia and Sudan or Egypt and Abyssinia or Ethiopia. Like I mentioned, it was only a few miles away from the Arabian Peninsula, the African continent. And so much of the Islam that we receive are through companions who are originally from the African continent, lived with the Prophet ﷺ, spent their life with the Prophet ﷺ, and then carried on the message of Islam to us. But this is something that just has escaped our education system in the Muslim world today. So we'll start off with Sumayya radiallahu anha. Sumayya bint Khayyat radiallahu anha, the first martyr in Islam, the first person to give her life for the sake of Islam, was of Ethiopian background. She was enslaved by a man named Abu Hudayfa. This is before the time of the Prophet ﷺ. She married a man named Yasir, who was an Arab. They were both slaves though, and they became free and they accepted Islam. So we know Yasir radiallahu anhu accepted Islam. His wife, Sumayya bint Khayyat radiallahu anha, accepted Islam. Who is their son? Anyone? Ammar radiallahu anhu. Jazakumullah khair. He was also from their family and from amongst the first that accepted Islam. So she's from amongst the first that accepted Islam. She's the first to give her life in Islam. And she's described as an Ethiopian woman, or a person that was, she had dark skin. And same was with her son Yasir radiallahu anhu. She was routinely oppressed with Bilal radiallahu anhu and Khabbab radiallahu anhu. And a very famous story, Abu Jahl came to her and her husband one day and forced her to renounce Islam. And she rejected and said, I will not renounce Islam. And so she stabbed her and she died from that stab of Abu Jahl. In one hadith, the Prophet ﷺ walks past her and her husband while they're being tortured and says, patience, O family of Yasir, for verily Jannah is waiting for you. And so she is the first martyr in Islam. This was Sumayya bint Khayyat radiallahu anha. Her son, Ammar bin Yasir, described as black, tall, and had curly hair, or we would call Afro-textured hair. He is from amongst the closest companions to the Prophet ﷺ. spent his life with the Prophet in the battles, migrated to Abyssinia, then migrated to Medina with the Prophet ﷺ, helped build the first masjid in Islam, and from amongst the first that accepted Islam, Ammar bin Yasir. Also, like I mentioned, from Ethiopian background, or his mother was from Ethiopian background. He was routinely oppressed also with Bilal and Khabab radiallahu anhuma. One day he was oppressed so badly, and the kuffar in Mecca, they said, renounce Islam or we'll kill you. And so out of fear for his life, he renounced Islam. And he came to the Prophet ﷺ crying. The Prophet ﷺ said, what happened? And he explained, O Prophet of Allah, they tortured me and they forced me to renounce Islam. And so I gave up my Islam because out of force, out of fear for my life. And so the Prophet ﷺ wiped away his tear and said, إِلَّا مَنْ أُكْرِهَ قَلْبُهُ وَقَلْبُهُ مُطْمَئِنٌ بِالْإِيمَانِ. He quoted an ayah from the Quran in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he's talking about people that renounce Islam, of course, be from amongst the losers, except إِلَّا مَنْ أُكْرِهَ, except for a person who's forced. وَقَلْبُهُ مُطْمَئِنٌ بِالْإِيمَانِ. And his heart is completely at peace with Islam. So the Prophet ﷺ wiped away his tear and consoled him and said, don't worry, you were forced to renounce your Islam, hence you're still a Muslim. Umar radiallahu anh also, like I mentioned, went to Abyssinia and then to Medina. He participated in Badr as well as in Uhud. And Umar radiallahu anh participated in the final Hajj as well with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And it was at this time that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam told Umar radiallahu anh that you will be killed by a group of transgressors. And so he was killed by Muslims in the civil war amongst the Sahaba that happened later on between Ali radiallahu anh and some other companions. And so this was predicted by the Prophet ﷺ. He was killed in the battle of Siffin. Moving on, Ayman radiallahu anha, she was known as the mother of the Prophet ﷺ. She was someone who spent, one of the only companions who saw the Prophet ﷺ from his birth until after he passed away. She was enslaved, and like I mentioned, she was a mother to the Prophet, and I'll explain that more. She was enslaved, she was an Abyssinian servant, and she was the servant of the Prophet ﷺ's father. So she was in the household of the Prophet ﷺ before he was even born. And then the Prophet ﷺ's father passes away, and she takes care of Amina, the mother of the Prophet ﷺ. And she's there when she passes away. And she takes care of the Prophet ﷺ. The Prophet ﷺ grows up and receives prophethood from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. She is from amongst the first that accept Islam. And the Prophet ﷺ always showed her lots of love, obviously, because she took care of the Prophet ﷺ. In one hadith, I think it's when she's coming to Medina, the Prophet ﷺ would call out to her and he said, Ya Ummi, oh my mother, oh my mother. And so the Prophet ﷺ loved her and cared for her like his own mother. She made hijrah to Abyssinia and then to Medina. She married Zayd bin Haritha radiallahu anhu, who was the quote-unquote adopted son of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the only companion that's mentioned in the Quran. فَلَمَّا قَضَى زَيْدٌ مِنْهَا وَطَرًا زَوَّجْنَاكَهَا. She married Zayd radiallahu anhu. And she participates in the battle of Uhud, giving the companions water during the battle. And she passes away after the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Very famous hadith. When the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam passes away, she cries. And she cries because now wahi has stopped. The fact that revelation, that the Muslim ummah received revelation from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, she cries over this. So Ayman radiallahu anha, the mother of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, also like I mentioned from Ethiopian background. Usama bin Zayd, her son, from Zayd radiallahu anhu, this was her son, Usama. He was treated like family by the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He participated in the Battle of Khandaq, or the Battle of the Trench, at the age of 17. He's the youngest person ever to be appointed by the Prophet ﷺ as a general of an army. And after the Prophet ﷺ passes away, some of the Sahaba, there's a little bit of a discord amongst the Sahaba. He's only 17, how can he lead an army? But Abu Bakr radiallahu anh says he was chosen by the Prophet, hence he will be the Amir, the general of that army. Hence he continues to be the general of that army. Umar radiallahu anh had a special love for Usama. There's a hadith reported that Umar radiallahu anh once, while distributing the spoils of war, gave Usama radiallahu anh more than he gave his own son, Abdullah. And so the Prophet, so the son of Umar radiallahu anh asks Umar, his father, why did you give Usama more than you gave me? And so Umar radiallahu anhu replies and he says, because the Prophet ﷺ loved Usama more than he loved you. And then he said, not only did he love Usama more than he loves you, but because he loved Usama's father more than he loves your father. Right? He loved Umar radiallahu anhu more than the Prophet ﷺ loved Zayd radiallahu anhu more than even Umar radiallahu anhu. And so Umar radiallahu anhu was very expressive of his love for Usama radiallahu anhu. Mughith radiallahu anhu, also a companion of Abyssinian background. He was what we would call the Romeo of the Sahaba. He was married to Barira radiallahu anha, who was the freed slave of Aisha radiallahu anha. And after they were freed, she chose to leave Mughith radiallahu anhu. And so it's a hadith reported by Ibn Abbas. He says, I can remember it's as if Barira, she's walking through the alleys of Medina, and Mughith is running behind her, asking her to marry him. Because they were married, but then they became separated. And Mughith was deeply in love with Barira radiallahu anha. And so the Prophet ﷺ called Barira radiallahu anha and said, take pity on Mughith, marry him again. And she said, oh Prophet of Allah, is this a command or is this just a suggestion? You're just interceding on his behalf. And so the Prophet ﷺ said, of course, I'm just interceding. I can't force you to marry anyone. And so she said, I have no need for Mughith. And so she left him. And so this is a very interesting story amongst the Sahaba. But Mughith radiallahu anhu, like I mentioned, from Abyssinian background. Now, moving on to companions of Persian background. Salim Mawla Abu Hudayfa radiallahu anhu. He is known to be from amongst the best reciters of Quran in the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He was from Istakhar in Persia, and he was, like most people, they moved around mainly because of being enslaved. He was enslaved by Abu Hudayfa, then he was freed by Abu Hudayfa, and then they became friends, and they were friends for the rest of their life, so much so that he's known as Salim, the servant of Abu Hudayfa. And so he learned the Quran. He was known to be a very, very righteous person. He would lead the Sahaba in Salah, even though he was very young at the time. And while many of the people in Mecca were migrating to Medina, he was the one who was appointed to lead the Salah. So much so, he even led Salah in Masjid Quba in the time of the Prophet ﷺ. Like I mentioned, he was of Persian background. Moving on, Salman Farsi radiallahu anhu, also of Persian background. He has one of the most interesting stories any companion can have. He was born in Isfahan, which is nowadays Iran, or in Persia, and he was born in a very religious family. And so he studied to be a priest, a Zoroastrian priest. And so he becomes a priest, and he was even the guardian of a fire temple, which was a very high social class. He was very religious. And all of a sudden, here comes this Christian caravan. And he hears about the Christian faith, and he accepts the Christian faith. And because of this accepting of the Christian faith, his family now imprisons him out of anger. You were raised in a leader of the Zoroastrian faith, and here you are leaving your faith for the Christian faith. And so they imprisoned him. When they imprisoned him, he found a way to leave, and he escaped the imprisonment of his parents. And he went with this caravan towards the Middle East. Now, while he is in the Middle East, more particularly in Damascus, in Mosul, and other areas in the Middle East, he is studying the Christian religion. And as he is studying the Christian religion, one of his teachers becomes very ill. And he goes from place to place. And what he does is he basically connects himself to a scholar, and he learns from them. And so Salman Farsi radiallahu anhu, he would go from city to city. In his last city in Syria, there is a teacher of his who tells him there is a prophet to come. He will come to the Arab nations, and his name will be Ahmad. And so he hears this, he understands this, and then at the same time, or around the same time, there was a caravan that was going from Syria to Medina, or Syria to Mecca. And Salman al-Farsi radiallahu anhu, he gets on that caravan, and he comes towards the city of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. As he's coming to the city of the Prophet, he's betrayed by the caravan owner, and he's enslaved as well. And so he gets to Medina, but he comes to Medina as a slave. He's the slave of a Jewish person. And Salman Farsi radiallahu anhu worked on in his garden. And so one day he came to see the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and because this is something that's taught in the Christian religion, in their faith, and in the Jewish faith as well, he knows a few signs of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So he comes to the Prophet ﷺ from amongst those three signs. Number one, the Prophet ﷺ will not eat from sadaqah, meaning he will not take from that which is sadaqah. Number two, that the Prophet ﷺ has a seal on his back. And so what that seal is, it's a part of his skin that looks like a seal and it's a sign of his finality, of his prophethood. So Salman Farsi radiallahu anhu, he knows this, and what he does is he comes to the Prophet ﷺ one day with a bunch of dates, and he's testing the Prophet ﷺ. And he gives it to the Prophet. He says, "Oh Prophet of Allah, these are sadaqah." So the Prophet ﷺ takes them and he gives it to all those around him, and he doesn't eat it himself. And so this was a sign to Salman al-Farsi radiallahu anhu that this is Muhammad, the Prophet that my teacher told me about. The next day he comes again with testing the Prophet ﷺ, gives him some dates, and says, "This is a gift." And because it's a gift and not sadaqah, the Prophet ﷺ eats from it. And so this proved to him, okay, this is Muhammad, the one that my teachers taught me about, the coming Prophet. And then the third day he comes, in some narrations it was the same day. The Prophet ﷺ, he sees that the Prophet ﷺ's shirt in his back was a little bit lagging. It was kind of falling off his back. And so Salman Farsi radiallahu anhu goes behind the Prophet ﷺ and looks for the seal of prophethood on the back of the Prophet ﷺ. He sees it and he kisses it. And then he accepts Islam, knowing that this is the final prophet of Allah, Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So this is how he accepts Islam, but he was still enslaved. And because he's still enslaved, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam then tells him to make a deal with his owner to free himself from the slavery of his owner. And so the deal that he makes is that he has to have 300 date palm trees. He has to gift them and put them in the ground for his Jewish owner, as well as an amount of gold. And so the Prophet ﷺ then fundraises amongst the Sahaba. Okay, Sahaba, let's go. Let's get him some trees. And slowly, the Sahaba would bring him trees. And the Prophet ﷺ gave it to him, and he'd hold on to them. The Prophet ﷺ said, "Allow me to put the seeds or the trees in the ground." And so once he collects all 300, the Prophet ﷺ goes one night and helps him dig and plant every one of those 300 trees. And by the way, by the fadl of Allah, those trees are still there today. The garden of Salman Farsi radiallahu anhu, still in Medina today. While you are making ziyarat in Medina, they will most probably bring you by that garden of Salman Farsi radiallahu anhu. And so the Prophet ﷺ helps him with that, helps him with the amount of gold, and frees him from the slavery that he was in. He then goes on to become from amongst the greatest companions of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He's the one that originated the idea of the trench, in the battle of the trench, and he narrates a good number of ahadith from the Prophet ﷺ as well. There are other Sahaba from the Persian background, so we mentioned Salim Mawla Abu Hudayfa, Salman al-Farsi radiallahu anhu, as well as Fayruz al-Daylami radiallahu anhu, and other companions as well. So this was his journey. Just a quick picture of it. He went from Isfahan in Iran to Damascus to Mosul, then up to Nusaybin, then up here, then makes his way to the Arabian Peninsula and meets the Prophet ﷺ, accepts Islam. This is a picture of the garden of Salman al-Farsi radiallahu anhu that still is in Medina. These trees planted by the Prophet ﷺ in the story I mentioned. Many Sahaba from the Jewish faith as well. Two of the wives of the Prophet ﷺ were Jewish converts or Jewish reverts to Islam. Safiya bint Huyay radiallahu anha and Rayhana radiallahu anha, both Ummahatul Mu'mineen, the mothers of the believers, the wife of the Prophet, the wives of the Prophet ﷺ. A whole clan that was believers in the Jewish faith, they accepted Islam as well. They were known as the Banu Najjar. And then we know Abdullah bin Salam radiallahu anhu, who was a Jewish rabbi in Medina, in Yathrib, before it was Medina. And in the coming of the Prophet ﷺ, he accepted Islam. I wanted to mention some other companions as well off the top of my head, but we are running out of time. But also from amongst the wives of the Prophet ﷺ, there's Maria Qibtiyya, who was a Coptic Christian from Egypt, who was gifted to the Prophet ﷺ. She bore Ibrahim radiallahu anhu, the son of the Prophet ﷺ, who passed away a year and a half or so after his birth, from amongst the wives of the Prophet ﷺ, and originally a Coptic Christian who then accepted Islam. Many other companions in the galaxy of the Sahaba radiallahu anhum were people of different races and different backgrounds, spoke different languages. The Prophet ﷺ himself, hadith reported by Bukhari, there was so many Sahaba that were from Africa, that the Prophet ﷺ also had learned some of the Ethiopian language. And in one hadith, the Prophet ﷺ speaks the language, and then if you look at the narration, the narrator of the hadith then says, this means this in the Abyssinian language. The Prophet ﷺ, while speaking to them, would sometimes use words from their language. And so this is something that was not only taught by the Quran, and not only taught by us by the Prophet ﷺ, but something that was practically shown in the community of the Prophet ﷺ. My time is up. I just leave you with the references. One book by Ibn Jawzi rahimahullah known as Tamir al-Habash fi Fadl al-Sudan wal-Habash. Anyone that reads Arabic, it's a book about great companions, great people of the past that were from what is now known as Sudan and Habash or Ethiopia in today's day and age. Also a great book written by Shaykh Yusuf Yasin, The Unique Shades of the Sahaba. He goes through a whole number of companions that were from different backgrounds in the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And then thirdly, Centering Black Narrative by Imam Dawood Walid and Ahmed Mubarak. A lot of good discussions and articles in that book in regards to racial equality in Islam. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to allow this weekend to be a weekend of learning and a weekend where we can implement these prophetic teachings into our life. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to rid our hearts of any ill feelings in our hearts in regards to any other group in the world, any other race in the world, any other group of people in the world. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to purify our hearts from that. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to fill our hearts with love and compassion for all people, of all backgrounds, of all traditions and languages, just like the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam taught us. With that being said, I thank everyone for being here. Jazakumullah khair. Subhanallah wa bihamdi. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdik. Nashhadu an la ilaha illa ant. Nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk.